בוקר טוב, שבוע טוב, welcome back. It's really wonderful to see you here and those that are the Zoom. It's, it has been some time now for different reasons, but now that Baruch Hashem we are back, I think it's fine, it's good. And I would like to go back to our series of shiurim about the great rabbis. We have plowed our way through history, and we are now in the 20th century. And truth to be told, when I finished last year near Shavuot, there was another shiur I was supposed to give on uh, on Rav Kaminetsky, Rav Yaakov Kaminetsky. However, so long has gone, and I didn't feel it was right to now go back, and I would have to do a whole rehearse of the last shiur. So, Bezrat Hashem, I would speak about the work that Rav Kaminetsky did in the United States when you'd have a shiurim about Rav Aaron Kotler, because they worked as a pair. So I thought that we'd complete about Rav Kaminetsky then, and we begin now something new because it's a new year, and it's more appropriate, I feel, to begin anew. And we begin today about something that is very far away from the United States and from Rav Kaminetsky, and we speak about Rav Yosef Messas or Mashash. Both pronunciations are being used, so you are free to choose. He himself wrote a short note in a remark in the beginning of his responsa, in which he is trying to investigate what is the source of the name Messas or Mashash. He concludes with two different suggestions. Either it's a name of a city in Spain from where his forebears has left in the expulsion, so that's one suggestion he has there. The other is that it's a name of a certain plant that is used for healing in Morocco. So either it's that or that. That's the name Messas or Mashash. I would use Mashash. It's easier for me to pronounce. Not a Moroccan. So Rav Yosef Mashash, a very long and distinguished family of Rabbanim. Also, he had relatives later here in Eretz Israel. Rav Shalom Mashash, a very well-known rabbi, was the Rav of Yerushalayim. His name is Rav Yosef Mashash, and he was born in 1892. 1892 in Maknes, in Morocco, at second Yom Tov of Shavuot. His father was Rabbi Chaim Messas, or Rabbi Chaim Mashash, was the leader of a leader or the leader of the community in Maknes, a Rosh Yeshiva, a Dayan, a Posek, a very important rabbi. So young Yosef learned in the best yeshivot of Maknes. Maknes itself had a very strong, what is called today Orthodox. Obviously, the word Orthodox is completely a misnomer for a community in Morocco. They would not recognize the name, but a very strong Jewish, Torani, Torah learning and observant community, and he was learning there, going up there. Unfortunately, his mother passed when he was 3 years old, and his father passed away when he was 12 years old. So he remained an orphan, and he had no other choice but to take a walk. He couldn't, there was no one else to provide for the family. And back then, at these places, it was expected if you are already 12 years old and unfortunately the parents had passed away, then it is upon you to provide for the family. We have to remember there is no social security, there is nothing like that. So you are supposed to provide. However, because he came from a very rabbinic, important family, then he was given a work, a position as the Safra de Dayana. Safra de Dayana, that is the scriber of the court. So you would sit in the Beit Din and you would write the shtarot, right, the different forms and the different rulings that the court would issue. And that way he was able to provide for his family obviously in a very narrow way, but he was able to provide for his brothers and sisters and was also able to continue his learning and his connection with the Rabbanim. Uh, as he was 15 or 16, he was also asked, there was a, what we would call today a maskil, I guess someone who was interested in history. So that was a guy from Turkey, and he was interested in the history of Morocco. So he asked the Rabbanim of Morocco, of Maknes, is there someone there that can write to him the history of the community in Maknes? And they asked the young Rav Yosef to be in contact with this uh, researcher, with this history, student of history from Turkey, and write to him the history of the Jews in Maknes. And Rav Yosef went into the depth of the issue, and he learned the history of the Jews in Maknes and wrote this history and sent it as a few very long letters. And a part of the interest for people that learn the history of the Jews in Maknes, a part of that, obviously, it gave the young Yosef an historical awareness. Because when you learn history, what happens is that you understand that there are times and there are different eras and periods, and there are different, what is really important is there are really different mindsets of people. The people during the 16th, the 16th century are not necessarily thinking in the same way as in the 18th century, and especially not as in the 20th century. So things are changing. Not only the material conditions are changing, and they are obviously changing, but also the way that people think. And we will see that understanding time and the changing of time would become a hallmark in the thought of Rav Yosef Messas. He was ordained as a rabbi by Rabbi Raphael Elenqua, who was the chief rabbi of Morocco. So again, he received a very traditional and honored uh, education, rabbinical education. In 1908, he is getting married with a woman, a girl named Simcha HaKohen. Unfortunately, the couple were not able to have children. So after 14 years, in 1922, he married a second wife, as was the minhag back then. If he was able to, he was not required to divorce the first wife. He was able to add a second wife. Her name was Rachel Lakrayev, and they would have one child. His name would be Eliyahu Mashash. But this child, now we skip to the future, but this child would make Aliyah and would have many children, Baruch Hashem. And to this day, there are many grandchildren, and the fourth generation and the fifth generation of Rav Yosef Mashash, all coming from this one only son. So that's a very moving, I think, story. Now, it's very interesting that he himself wrote a responsa many, many years later, in 1944. Someone asked him, a couple that were not able, again, to have children, so the husband asked him, should he divorce his wife? And you can see it in the source, first source here in the answers. ומה גם בזמן הזה, so he says, in our times, שההפרדה וההרכבה בעניין זה קשה מאוד מאוד לאדם. It's very difficult for us in our times. It's very interesting. He says, in our times, it's very interesting, the הפרדה and הרכבה, meaning to get divorced and then to get remarried. That's not something that you are easily doing. And it seems from his language that it is more difficult now, meaning in the 40s, than it was 100 years ago. And that's a very interesting statement. It may be because the expectations of people from marriage are being changed. And there are different social process that can cause such a change. So, for example, it may be that if people were used, that there would be sometimes 20 years gap between the husband and the wife, which was something that was very common in certain places. So usually if there is such a big gap, age gap, then you do not expect the husband and the wife to be the closest friends, just because it's a very big difference. So the whole way that the household is being managed is different. Your expectations are different. And then it may be so, obviously, we speak about a very general thing. So there still may be people that will be 40 years of a gap and they would be an excellent and a happy couple. But and also happiness may has nothing to do with that. You can be very happy without being the best friend with your spouse. It's different lifestyles. Yeah, these are different. We have to understand these are different lifestyles. Now, again, if we do not have historical conscience, then we may look back and we just assume that what seems to us as normal, so that was always the normal, because that is what is normal. But if you begin to read about the history, you understand that normal can also change. Obviously, human beings are human beings, and some things do not change. But some socio-economical conditions can change, and sometimes this can cause a great difference in the way that we conceive certain foundations. So, be it as it be, that he does not expand here, but he says, in our times, separating and reassembling are very difficult to the human being. ובפרט לצנועים, even more to modest people, which for them it's difficult to open up to someone and then חס וחלילה to get divorced and to find another someone and to again build a shared and intimate life. הן מצד עצמם, כי עזה כמוות האהבה. He says also the love is stronger. And again, he speaks from almost a personal experience. So he says, love is stronger, or is as strong as death. You are trying to separate someone from his life. ויפרד מר ממוות. כי המוות קורית בפעם אחת רחמנא ליצלן. So death only happens once. But זה כל יום. Here, if someone gets separated from someone he loves, from a spouse he loves, יראו עיניו כידו, אשת חיקו בחיק זר. So he says, every day when you see your spouse with someone else, that's a daily death. And then he adds, ומה גם אם היה משנואי נפשו. And maybe you hate the guy that the woman got married with, or she hates the guy, the girl that he gets married with. So עיניו רואות וקלות. אין מצד פירוט הרבה משפחות. So he says, you know, the families, it's not only the husband and the wife. When there is a marriage, the whole family become one. So it may be that there are many other now friendships that were established by this marriage, and when there would be a divorce, it would cause all havoc in the, we would say, in the social structure. כי כל זיווג קשורים בו הרבה משפחות בעבותות אהבה, כגון בעלי אחיותיהם, he says the בעלי אחיות, that's a גיס. How do you say? The brother-in-law. So brothers-in-law and sisters-in-law, and everyone is friend now. So you want בהישבר הזוג, when the couple are being broken, לא לבד כריתת עבותות האהבה, it's not enough that the ropes of love are being severed, but also הריגת עבותות שנאה ואיבה now begins despise and hatred for many years. ומה גם בזמן ההיפרד כמה ירחי עמל ונדידת שינה לזוג והוריו, and also when they are separating they need to separate the money, so that would almost always cause a strife to the couple, to the parents, כמה מריבות ושעונות, כל מין חירוף וגידוף, so people are cursing, and you see that he is really is being in what he saw. את אשר ישנו ואת אשר איננו, so they curse everyone, the people that are here, the people that are already, that are not here, no one can escape when there is a divorce, the strife and the hatred. כל מיני קללות, זלזולים, ביזיונים, כזבים, שקרים, עלילות דברים, ויש מוסיפים לזלזל גם בשבועות, נידויים, חרמים, people swear and people make excommunication, bans, they stop speaking with each other. ומה גם בעניין פירעון הכתובה, what about paying the כתובה והנדבין והמתנות, כמה עליות וירידות they go to the court, כל העם רואים את הקולות ואת הלפידים, and then everyone knows. ובוזים להם ולועגים להם, they become the laughing stock of the whole city. ונוסף עוד העידנא חקור דין בבית דין הגבוה, כמה הוצאות. So now you need to hire lawyers. So how many do you have to expenses? כמה מרמות ותחבולות של עורכי דין. So he says all the lies and the deceptions of the that's what he says, of the lawyers. לסכסך איש באחיו, משפחה במשפחה. So they try, because the lawyer obviously, if the as long as the fight continues, is continue to get paid. So he has an interest. I'm not saying that all the lawyers are like that, but it seems that there are some. So he says, and so they have the interest to continue the fight. ואחר העלייה מן ההר דינו, and then after finally you end with the divorce, but you have completely been smeared all over the city. So now קשה מאוד למצוא איזה רגון כנגדו. Now go and find someone that would agree to marry you. ואף אם ימצא איזה רגון, says even in the end you'd find a second wife that would be good, כבר מילתה הוא אמורה, אין אדם מוצא קורת רוח אלא מאשתו הראשונה, ודבריהם אמת. It says already it was said by Chazal that there is no love, we would say, as first love, and he says, and what they say is true. So you see from here that that was for him it was extremely, even that he didn't divorce, if I understand correctly the story, he didn't divorce his first wife, he only added, well, I don't know if only is the right word, but he added another wife. It seems that it was very dramatic in his own experience, this happens. Okay, so that's, as I said, that's 1908, 1922. In 1924, at the age of 31, he understands that in Maknes right now he's not going to get any position because there were many rabbis there and older than he is. So he begins to look also abroad, and he finds in Algiers, in a city I practiced just before this shiur that I would be able to pronounce, and now I look at it and that it's something like Telemsan or Telmesan, I think. Telemsen. Okay, so Telemsen, thank you. And he is going to there in Algiers, and he's being asked, he's being invited to come as the chief rabbi. He goes there. Now, it's a very different place than Maknes. We have to understand, it may be that for some of us who are somewhat distanced from the history of North Africa, then for us, all of these places are the same. Just as maybe someone from North Africa would say, so Galicia and Poland and Hungary and the whole thing, right? They all eat chulent. It's the same place. So we may look and say they all eat couscous, right? But obviously, when you go in the details, there are great differences. And one of the major factors in North Africa was, when were you colonized? Usually in these places by the French. That's a very important question, because the French are bringing with them modernism, enlightenment, emancipation, and secularization. So when they come in, it's usually about one generation till you begin to see the effects of all of these phenomena that I just mentioned. And the French came into Algiers much earlier, decades earlier than when they came into Morocco. So Morocco was still much more, again, I would use the word orthodox or conservative. Obviously, all of these words are not really, these are words imported from other places, and we just borrow them to try and describe something which is unique and special to its own place. But they were still less touched by modernism than in Algiers. So when he comes to Algiers, he suddenly finds something very, very different than what he was used to. And in the introduction to his responsa in source bet, he described this experience. צנוף צנפני צנפה, כדור מארץ מולדתי. So I was thrown as a ball from the place where I was born. עיר ואם בישראל מקנס, יגן עליה אלוקים. So I was born in the great city that God should protect it, מקנס. עיר גדולה של חכמים ושל סופרים. So that's a great city of sages and of scribers. And there I was raised. לפה, now I came here, עיר ואם בישראל, תל מצ'ן, יגן עליה אלוקים also, may God protect it, אחת מערי המזרח, it's one city in the east, אשר אור התורה בדור הזה מהם ברח. So the light of Torah had ran away from them. ונשארתי גלמוד לבדי. So there I was one rabbi among many. And I came here, and I am the only rabbi. No one around. I remained alone, נר יחידי, a lonely candle. ובכל רגע מלך בלעות עלי השקיף, ומצודו עלי הקיף. And I'm threatened, I'm intimated by everything that goes around. להמעיד קרסולי מנתיב היושר. I feel that there is a pull that I should fall for my feet. So he was really feeling alone there. One of the first questions that he had to engage with immediately upon coming is that the butchers, the kosher butchers in the city, they were selling to both Jews and non-Jews. Why? Because you shacht and you slaughter the animal. If it's kosher, you sell it to the Jews. If it's non-kosher, you sell it to the non-Jews. Now, the non-Jews can also come on Shabbat. There is no reason why not. So it makes sense to open your itlis also on Shabbat and even to slaughter the animals on Shabbat. And again, if it's kosher, you would keep it for Sunday. Maybe that also some Jews would come in and buy on Shabbat. But let's say that you would keep the kosher animals for Sunday and the non-kosher animals you would sell to the Arabs. And more of the butchers, that's what they're doing. And now there is a question. If someone is mechalel Shabbat befarhesia, on the street and public, then basically you cannot rely on his testimony that the food is kosher. So the whole kashrut of the meat system is falling apart. That is the problem that he is facing. And he begins trying to convince the butchers to keep Shabbat, to return to observing Shabbat. And he tells in the responsa that he was able to convince all of them, I don't know how many of them there were, but I guess that a few dozens. He was able to convince them all, apart of one. He was just unable to convince him to close on Shabbat. Now again, this is new thing for him, because on Maknes, you just close it by the order of the law, because the law is still religious. The state recognizes the authority of the religious authority, so the rabbis for the Jews, and they can decide that a certain store would be closed, and the police would enforce that. But in Algeria, it's the French. There is a freedom. You can choose if you'd open your store on Shabbat or not. And you have to convince them. If you want them to close on Shabbat, you have to convince them. He was not able to convince this last guy. And when the other butchers saw that he's opening on Shabbat, they all said, so he must open too, otherwise everyone would go to him. And as he saw that he's not able to convince them, he had two possibilities. One is what basically happened in Ashkenaz, and that is the system that we know to this day. To say, okay, so all of you are non-kosher, we would find 2, 3, 4 butchers that are observant, and they would keep the Shabbat, and you would establish a whole system of kashrut, and only them would get kashrut. And the people that buy from these non-kosher butchers, then in a few, as we can understand, very quickly, the whole thing would separate into 2 different communities, as happened in Europe. And he decides that he is not willing to go down this path. He understands, he's being suggested that that's what he should do, and he refuses. He says, I want the community to stay one. And he writes not a very long answer, but a fairly long answer in which he defends his decision to keep giving his stamp of kashrut even to the butchers that open on Shabbat. Now he has a few reasons why to do so. He says, A, there is an halachic opinion. It's not the opinion that was passed in the Shulchan Aruch, but there is an halachic opinion that as long as you do not do a deoraita, you only break the Shabbat the Rabbanan, then you are still you keep your ne'emanut, you keep your faithfulness in regards kashrut, and he asked the butchers not to slaughter on Shabbat. So only to sell in the store and to peel the skin maybe, but that they would do by goyim. So he is able to arrange it that they would only violate the Shabbat in rabbinical prohibitions and not in the Oraita prohibitions. And that way, so that's one step to, obviously it's not a kasher glut, it's not a good kashrut, but he says I'm willing to take this downgraded kashrut in order to keep the unity of the community. Second, he argues that the halacha was set that if you break the Shabbat, you cannot be believed regarding treifa because Shabbat is more chamur than treifa. So if you break the Shabbat, then obviously you do not care also about treifot. But it says reality has changed. These people care about treifot. And he proves, he says, they come to me with shailot that they were able, if they would have wanted, they would sell it as, and they would be able to stick it. But I see that they really don't want to cause others to fail in treifa. So for some reason, Shabbat became for them more kal, more lenient than treifa. It is not correct. It's the wrong order of preferences, but that's just what happened. So the ancient rule that if you break the Shabbat, you cannot be relied for kashrut does not apply anymore. It's just not correct. Now, obviously, that's a big chiddush that you take a rule from the Gemara and you decide that it cannot be applied anymore to our times. You understand the problem in doing such a step, but he is the Rav, and as he said, he's the only Rav there. So he called the shots.
Every now and then.
Yeah, basically, he would go around, he would make rounds. Yeah, but obviously, look, we understand. It was not a good kashrut. I think that we can admit to that. He also would admit to that. He also says, he just said, I'm doing a trade-off. And I decide that I can suffer a downgrade in kashrut. Obviously, he does not think that he is feeding the people with treif, chas v'chadila. He says, I'm willing to take a hit on the kashrut wing in order to keep the ahavat chinam wing. We'd call it like, or the shalom wing. It seems that yes, but I cannot. It seems that yes from the stories, but I cannot. I mean, I was not there. I just don't know. I just don't know. The third one was he said even if you do not rely on them, the katzavim hate each other. The butchers hate each other. So if they would know that someone is selling treif, then it will be reported. So there is mashgichim, right? Each one is supervising the other. That's what he says. And he says also they have no reason to lie about treif because they sell it in the same price to the non-Jews. So they have no interest. Anyhow, they slaughter a certain amount of animals. The kosher they sell to the Jews, the non-kosher to the non-Jews, and that's for them it's the same game. So why would they lie? So taking all of these reasons into account, he decides that he can rely on them, although they did not shachten anymore on Shabbat, but they sell on Shabbat. They're mechalel Shabbat. They break the Shabbat in Parhesia. So that was a groundbreaking rule to make at the age of 31, in a very, very young age. But that was his decision, and as we will see, that would become a goal of his to keep the unity. Now, many would say that if you'd ask yourself, why is it that in Europe, when someone went what we call today off the derech, he went completely off the derech. Meaning in Europe, you could either be black or white. These were the options. There was no middle way. Because either you went completely with the Orthodox, or if you broke the Shabbat, that was the end. So you were out. So we would not eat from you. If you touch wine, it's us. Everything is done. So you are out. They would sit shiva on you in some places. In the more Sephardi world, there was a different atmosphere. Rav Mashash is an extreme point of this atmosphere, for sure. But is a representative of an attitude which says you can be, to some extent at least, a violator of certain averot, but we still see you as one of us. Okay, you fall prey to your bad inclination, but we contain that. And we would pay a price for containing that, such as the price that he was willing here to pay in kashrut and in Shabbat. But we are willing to take the hit in order to keep the community united. A, because keeping community united is important in and by itself. And B, because if you are in the fold, then one day you or your children would return. But if we rejected you with both hands, then you would just go and either that you would מתבולל, assimilate in the non-Jewish world, or even if they would not accept you, as happened many times, but you'd be completely removed from the religious world, and your children would be educated in non-religious schools, and then they would, even if they would want to come back, it would be very, very difficult for them. So we are willing to accept you as you are in order at least to save the children. And we can see it nowadays that the tshuva movement in North African Jewry is in a much better state than in the European Jewry. Why? Because of this exact reason. Because they remained in the fold. So again, I'm not saying that was the right decision. These are very difficult decisions to take, especially as they happen, trying to predict what would happen 100 years in the future. And also the social environment was very different in Europe and in North Africa. So obviously there are different factors in play here. I'm just specifying this one and the way of thought of people like Rav Mashash, who took it really to the extreme, that we want to keep everyone as long as we are able to. Okay, so that's a famous tshuva. He also did his best in order to train rabbis. Oh, now again, he's very young, he's in his 30s, but he's a genius, he's a Gaon, he's a Talmid Chacham, he's acknowledged as a Talmid Chacham, and he's trying to train new rabbis, or he finds some rabbis in Algiers, but some of them are really ignorant. They are Ama Artzim, and you know what they say, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is a king. So they were Rabbani because they knew more than the other people, but sometimes it didn't really help. So he writes guidebooks for Rabbanim, guidebooks how to make gittin. Because making gittin is an intricate process. And you have people there who are, and again, there is no internet, there is no, even the mail system is not as good as in other places. So your local Rav has to be Mesader a get. But if you are making a mistake in a get, and the get does not work, then you have mamzerim, and the whole thing is a mess. So he is giving them very clear, easy, we would say today, he's giving them the Schuttenstein version of how to make a get. And also he writes them a sefer about kashrut, again with the same, the kashrut called Zevach Todah, the gittin called Geresh Yerechin, and the point here, the goal here is to help the Rabbanim, the local Rabbanim manage their communities. In 1934, he writes the first volume of his responsa, Shut Maim Chaim. Maim is Moreinu Yosef Mashash, and Chaim is the name you remember of his father, Chaim Mashash. So, Shut Maim Chaim, living water, and in it is very interesting responsa dealing with modern questions. So, for example, he is dealing with electricity, because together with the French came to Algiers also electricity. So now he's dealing with electricity. When is electricity allowed, when is not? And it's very interesting. He loves electricity. I think it's a great idea. He says we were sitting in the dark in order to learn at night. We had to light candles and they were smelly and it was not good for the eyes. And now you can just turn on a light bulb. He says even the most poor people can allow themselves to have electricity. So he's very excited about electricity. He deals about electricity on Shabbat and Yom Tov. He goes to electricity engineers in order to understand how electricity works. And he decides that on Shabbat it is asur to use electricity, but according to him on Yom Tov, you are allowed to turn on and off electricity. So that's obviously again a major chidush. And in Morocco, for a very long time, that was the minhag. People that came here they were told that you are not allowed to use electricity on Yom Tov, and now only very few families are using this hater, but that was his hater. By the way, also the Aruch HaShulchan in Lithuania had a similar hater. I think he was only using it in order to turn on and not in order to turn off on Yom Tov. And again, there are some families. I think nowadays there is like a standardization of these things. So I don't know how many people that went through the yeshiva system here in Israel are still applying this heterim, but these were serious rabbanim who studied the issue and came to their own conclusions. And obviously he was for sure ordained to get to his own decision. And that was his what he thought. Okay, so he continues there in Telmetchen, Tlemchen. So he continues there, and after 14 years in Algiers, Chacham Moshe Toledano passes away in Maknes, and there is an opening, so he is invited by the Rabbanim of Maknes to return home, to return to Morocco, and he returns. But when he returns, he discovers a different city than the city he left just 14 years before, because now the Morocco became a protocrat of the French. So that was a big difference. And now the French law is being applied. So again, emancipation, modernization, secularization, all these zations are happening big time in Morocco, and things are changing fast. We as apologize, as Ashkenazim, have this thinking, again, black and white, that in Europe there was the process of modernization, but the Sfaradim remained as in pre-modern time until they came to the modern state of Israel. That is far from being true. We have to understand that. Now, again, it's a different process of emancipation and modernization than what happened in Europe. For sure, it's different. But it did happen. And again, it happened in different volumes in Morocco, in Algeria, in Tunis. Each one of these places had its own course of history, just as Russia and Germany had different courses of history, although the Jews in both places were davening in the Ashkenazi Nusach, or at least in some type of an Ashkenazi Nusach. So he returns to Maknes to find a different city. Look here at source Gimel, how he describes that. And again, you can see here his historical awareness. He's not just coming in and beginning to shout, how can it be? People do not learn Torah anymore as they used to. And he understands that something major had shifted. And in order to understand that, you need to have a broader view than what sometimes your small shul rabbi, who only sees what happens in front of him, would be able to gather. But he was exposed to much larger processes, and he's also interested. He reads history. You know that he read history. Now, again, he didn't have the access to the great libraries that you had in Europe at the time. So what he is being given is only books that he's able to put his hands on. But nonetheless, he has curiosity. He's a type of an intellectual, and he's doing his best in order to understand what is going on. And that's what he writes as you can see in source Gimel. Miyom biat hatzarfatim le'ireinu. So from the day the French came to our city, התחילה תקופה חדשה בסדרי החיים. It was the dawn of a new era in the order of life. So again, you see that he has this bird view. מאן דקרעי לה תקופה יפה, לא משתבש, Uman dekari la ra'a lo mishtav. He says it has good side and the bad side. If you say that it's good, you are not wrong. But also if you say that it is bad, you are not wrong. Why? כי השלווה והשקט גברו בארץ. No more pogroms. There is law and order. The French really brought with them law and order. אך המנוחה והמרגעה שהיה בלב לשמוח כל אחד בחלקו עם טוב ועם רע חלפה כליל. But on the other hand, people that used to be content with what they had, simple as they used to be, suddenly there is a new time. Capitalism came in. People are striving to get more. Now, again, for us, it may be just the simple facts of life. That's normal. Wasn't it like that always? Answer is no. No. People were born, happy with what they had, worked in whatever their father worked, and that was the end of the story. And they didn't try to climb in the social ladder because you couldn't climb. There was no social mobility. So you couldn't climb. You were just content with what you had. And suddenly doors open. Now, there is something beautiful in doors open. But when the doors are open, people now aspire to climb the eco-social ladder. Now, you want to climb, you have to walk. You work hard. And if you work hard for many hours, you don't have time to the religious activities that once you had time for. And it's not only the time on the clock. It's the time in your heart. What is important to you? What do you invest in? Where would you send your child to learn? What do you think is important for him to learn? Now, again, if the roof of his expectations are to be a shoemaker as his father, then obviously he needs to learn the subject matter, but it can be learned not in a very long time. And you sit and work, and you work for 5 or 6 hours a day. You earn a meager living, but that's what you expected to bring home. And the rest of the time, you learn Torah, do chesed, do mitzvot, do tefillah, listen to the drasha of the Rav that can take 3 hours, and no one rushes. You have nowhere to rush. And also, you don't think about work when you are in shul or in home because work is just, life is just what it is. But when you aspire, then you give more hours. And also your mind, you come to shul, but instead of thinking about tefillah, you think about how to grow your business. I know that you cannot believe that people would go in. But so he says, רבו המותרות לאין קץ. Now people are looking for leisures. רבו המותרות לכל צורכי האדם, בכסות. There are new clothes. We read some of the responses. People had one set of clothing for a weekday and one for Shabbat, and these were the rich people. But now, new clothes coming from French, right? And it's expensive. פרנסה, מדור, כל כלי תשמישו, people have new appliances. Electricity is beautiful, you can learn Torah at night. But you know what? It's also now you can buy a washing machine. I don't think they had a laundry machine there, but you understand? Now you can buy appliances. But in order to buy appliances, you need to work. So new horizons open. I always remember when I was a student in Gush, so they had a few Arabs from the village nearby that were working, doing cleaning and other works. And I once, they needed to be accompanied in and out of the yishuv. So I was once accompanying such a worker, and I spoke with him. I don't know, back then, it was 20 years ago, he was 50 or 55, I guess. And I spoke with him. And I told him that I just bought a washing machine because we were a new couple. We bought a washing machine. He told me, why did you buy that? I told you, I don't want my wife to stand and wash. He said, why not? That's what she should do. Otherwise, who knows what she would do? She shouldn't have spare time. That's Paro, right? תכבד העבודה על האנשים ואל ישו בדברי שקר. Who knows? She needs to work. But now, there is, people are aspiring for other things. And ומה גם אצל הנשים והבנים והבנות אשר עלה באפם עוז ריח העת החדשה. So they smell, right? They wake up and smell the coffee. Life is changing. ועל כן רבתה הטרחה והיגיעה והעבודה ומשלחת יד בכל מסחר ונלוו עמהם הקנאה והתחרות והתאווה. That's a description. So that is someone we can think about, maybe about socialist Russia, communist Russia. And suddenly, right, in almost overnight, it becomes capitalist. And people of the old breed, they look and they're astonished. Yesterday, at least on paper, everyone was equal. And I understand that that really was not the way that, but at least right, that was the vision, at least. But next day, everything is different. Everyone is trying to grab as much as he can. Now, the people that can adjust quickly, then they become the oligarchs, and the others become their servants. So things are changing very, very quickly. And he is looking slightly from a side because he is a rabbi. He does not play the game, but he sees how things are changing. And he continues, he says, so instead of learning Torah, people are going to get jobs. And instead of going to yeshiva, they are going to the new institutions of learning because now they have to earn a degree. Who thought about earning a degree just 15 years ago, 20 years ago? No one. But now you want to be part of the, how would you say in French, bourgeois, right? You are trying to become one of this new, at least middle class. Okay, so he says there are good things in it, but there are also some things that are very bad, difficult, and he is trying to manage these new challenges because, as I said, he is not the type that would say, okay, things are changing, let's erect walls and try to remain in some nature, shmurat teva, a nature preserve, right, and continue to walk with chiefs and with notzot, feathers. He's not this type of a man. He says we have to change with the time, but of course we have to keep Halakha as it is. He's not a reformer, so he wants to keep Halakha, but he wants to also be connected with the changing tides of time, and that's an extremely difficult position to navigate in times in the old times, especially in times like the one that he was living through, and may I add the times that we are still living through. I think that we developed tools that were not available to him. He was the first generation in his place to face such challenges. And as always, in the first generation, you pay a very high tuition. Afterwards, you have more of an understanding. If you are still standing, then you have more of an understanding what should be done. Okay, so that was, as I said, in 1941. He is, again, the word liberal is completely out of context here, but I would use it anyway just to portrait. So he is sitting on the extreme liberal end of the spectrum. And he is trying to give the people as much leniency as he can in order to keep them in the fold. So things are changing, but we still remain faithful, observant Jews. It may be that some chumot that we are able to hold to, we are not able to hold to anymore. So we should differentiate between what is the ikar hadin, what is the core of the law, and what are additional chumrot. If we can keep the additional chumot, that's beautiful. But if they cannot be kept, we should not throw the core of the law just because we cannot keep the additional chumot. Again, in Europe, it was a completely different music. There they said if you are, especially in Hungary, in places like that, if you change one comma from the minhag, I think about the Khatam Sofer. Adam Sofer said minhagim are more important than the core of the law because the core of the law may be only the Rabbanan, but the minhagim, they are as a vow, so they get a deoraita status. So if you change chadash asur min Torah, every change in anything completely puts you out of the line. But they were trying to do something that is very, very, very different. So he gave some very interesting responsa. I think he has the first responsa about השתלת רשתית, implantation of cornea. So it's very interesting. That is from 1951, still in Morocco, still under the French, and they have already the technology in order to do this type of transplantation. That's the word, transplantation. And he's writing an answer, a beautiful answer. Our time begins to be short here. If you would want, it's in source Dalet here. You can look it afterwards. And he says it is mutar. He said it's not bizion. There is no, excuse me, it is not dishonoring the dead because it's an honor that he would be able to donate to someone else. And then he continues and says, and now we cannot promise that it would go to a Jew because it's a Goyish hospital. So if you donate, you donate. But he says, there are more non-Jews than Jews. So statistically, there would be more Jews that would gain from the non-Jews than the other way around. That's one. So he says, so it's good for us to participate in the game in the long view. And B says, and that's amazing. He says, ואף אם אותו דבר יובא מעין ישראל המת לעין הגוי החי, so even if it would be taken from a dead Jew and be given to a living non-Jew, it says, A, it's not bad because tomorrow it would be the other way around, and C and B, בזה תהיה ניכרת אהבת אדם לאדם, by that it would be apparent that human beings love each other. בלי הבדל דת, כי כולם בריאותיו של הקדוש ברוך הוא הם. That's an amazing sentence to see in a responsa by a posek. So he says it would be apparent that people love each other because they are people, because we were all created by Hashem. And there is no reason why we would not donate a part, an eye, to a non-Jew. So again, very, very, I think that's the first response written on the subject. Obviously, we do not pass right now in this subject. There is a lot that was written also later, and technology changed. There are always things that are being changing, but only to understand the spirit that he is coming from. In 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel, he is a great supporter of the State of Israel, is a great supporter of Zionism. He equates it to the Shivat Zion, to the coming back from Bavel to Eretz Israel at the time of Koresh. And he says these are secrets. He uses the words Atchalta de Geula, it's the beginning of our redemption. He says on Yom Ha'atzmaut, we must say Hallel. It seems even that he was in favor maybe of doing a real holiday, of not working. So he is full committed to Zionism. His son is making Aliyah. Again, I'm beginning to skip here. His son is making Aliyah. In 1964, he comes in order to visit his son, and he's a great rabbi from Morocco, also he's very famous. So David Ben-Gurion, prime minister, asks to meet him. He meets with Ben-Gurion, and Ben-Gurion says to him, it's very interesting, Ben-Gurion says to him, you should not repeat the scene of the Meraglim, of the spies. So the Rav is aghast. He says, what does he speak about? He says, if you would visit here in Israel and you'd go back to Morocco, people would say that you thought that Israel is no good, and that's why you returned. So by return, just as the Meraglim were the great people, the Nessim, and they didn't want to come in, and that caused many people not to go, in the same way, if you would now go back, that would signal to many people that they shouldn't make Aliyah. And Rav Messas says, you know what, you're right. I accept your opinion. And he decides that he would make. Of course, he has to go back and rearrange his things, but he makes Aliyah, and he goes to Haifa. Now, there were some Moroccan Jews in Haifa. There was a reason why he came there, but we have to understand that Haifa back then was called Haifa Aduma, Red Haifa. It was a very strong stronghold of secularism, socialism. It was almost a communist city. It was difficult to find a kosher restaurant in Haifa of the time, and now, Baruch Hashem, things are better, but it's still not so simple to find a kosher restaurant sometimes in Haifa. So it was a very interesting decision not to go to Yerushalayim. I mean, there were places in which can easily go in, but he went to Haifa, and there he met with Abba Hushi, who was the mythological Rosh Ir, a mayor of Haifa, and Abba Hushi was so impressed with his personality of a peace-loving rabbi that he said to him, I want you to become my rabbi, and as I am the mayor, I want you to become the city's chief rabbi. Up to then, they didn't have a Sephardi chief rabbi because they were not interested. But now that he met with Rav Mashash, he wanted him to become the Sephardic chief rabbi. It took a few months in order to all the bureaucratic processes to be completed, but he became the chief rabbi of Haifa, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Haifa, and remained in that position till his death 10 years later. In this position, by the way, he was the first one in Israel to give kashrut lepesach for kitniot, because the Rabbanut was governed by Ashkenazim, and if you had kitniot in your product, you couldn't get kashrut. Nowadays, it seems almost the opposite, right? But he was the first one to give kitniot to kashrut, and Rav Kaniel, who was the Ashkenazic chief rabbi of Chai, said, what do you do? It's kitniot. Rav Mashash says, okay, we are eating kitniot. It's fine. It's fine. You have 50% of the people that are allowed to eat. There is no reason why you wouldn't give kashrut. Rav Mashash wrote, I think, more than 40 books of history. He wrote about history. He wrote about Torah. He wrote letters. He wrote songs. He was a painter, and he was a member in the Agudat HaTzayarim. I don't know how to translate that. The Order of Painters, the Guild of Painters in Israel. So he asked to be permitted. At the beginning, he didn't know how to eat such a person, right? A rabbi, a painter, but he was really a painter. So he painted some of his books, some of his sefarim. So he published the Haggadah, Perush LaHaggadah, with his own painting. So he has his own Perush and his own painting. He's a really special person. We may say that his model, his heritage, his legacy is that a truthful psika should take into account, obviously, the din, the halakha, but he said there are three elements. First and foremost is the halakha. Then he says seichel, just common sense. And third is the time. Now, saying that you need also to join common sense, that is very common. Many rabbis said there is a fifth column to the Shulchan Aruch, which is the common sense. But he said even that is not enough. You have to understand the period you are working in, because it's different. If you are in Israel in the 20th century, or in Morocco in the 19th century, or in Europe, these are different times, and you must adapt, not chas v'chaila reform, but adapt to the time in which you act. And as I said, he only had one son, but he had a fetal medium that continued this legacy. And this year, he became the dmut, the figure for the chinuch dati. So he is being acknowledged as he should. And as I said, a very interesting figure, very extreme in many of his leniencies. We didn't have the time now to go into the details, but very extreme, but coming from this position that we want to contain, we want our tent to be as wide as possible. And even if we argue with him about some of the details, obviously the endeavor itself is something to be admired and to learn from. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, one quick question.
Yeah, for sure.
Why it was possible to do in